I thought this look would be easy, but it's far from it. So let's talk about this. Let's open DaVinci Resolve, and here is the reference frame from the music video of Enough the Search. And it looks like it is pretty easy. It is really muted and it's shifted to the green, and I thought just reduce the highlights, reduce the overall exposure and shift it towards the green, but it turned out to be much more difficult than I anticipated. So let's have a look. Here is the footage that I have, and here is the look that I ended up with. That is, if you judge by the scopes and by the vector scope and all of that, this is as close as I can get to the original footage. Ideally, you would have to have the same kind of footage, the same cloudy day, because cloudy day creates a uniform, pleasant looking lighting. It's working like a softbox. Unfortunately, I couldn't find, and I wasn't able to film, I couldn't find the footage that I wanted. It is a clear day, and the contrast ratio is going to be completely different, but I have what I have. So let's try to work our way. I'm going to disable everything. I'm going to show you what I did, what I created in order to achieve that look. Let's start with our project settings. Color management, color science DaVinci Wire GP, timeline color space DaVinci White Gamut Intermediate, and output color space Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. That is the settings. Now, before we can work with this image, we need to transform it into DaVinci White Gamut, and then from DaVinci White Gamut into Rec 709, so I'll be able to monitor what I'm doing. So I did that. First, we created IDT, Input Device Transform. I applied effect that is called Color Space Transform and transformed from Red White Gamut RGB Red Look 3G10 into DaVinci White Gamut DaVinci Intermediate. Then I created ODT, Output Device Transform, and I applied the same effect, Color Space Transform, but now I'm transitioning from DaVinci White Gamut DaVinci Intermediate into Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Why did I do that? Initially, I transformed my image into DaVinci White Gamut, which is the widest gamut possible. And working in that gamut is guaranteed that I'm not going to run into some issues with clipping or with when the parts of the footage they are spilling over the color space and it produces a lot of artifacts. So I'm proving myself that I'm going to work within this color space and everything will be fine. But I need to monitor it on the Rec 709 monitor and I need to output it to Rec 709. That's why I have an ODT that is going to output this, that is going to transition from this DaVinci White Gamut working area into output color space Rec 709. I hope this makes sense. Everything else will be done in between. First of all, I established some contrast. I played with the offset, I played with gain, gamma, and leave to establish the contrast that I want. Because if we look at the NF reference frame, we can see that the image is almost touching 0. That is what I wanted to achieve too. And the highest portion is lying near 640. Mine is much higher because I have quite different settings, because when I tried to pursue the same brightness right at the beginning, it always resulted in an ugly image. So I set it at the correction. I'm going to show you how, and this is like the last step of the color grading. For now, we're gonna leave it at that. Now the trick that is going to play the most important role in this color grading. Without this trick, I couldn't achieve the look that I achieved. Typically, I would start pushing green in our image because, as we can see, there is a lot of green. And then I would desaturate it a bit, because if we judge by the vector scope, our reference frame is quite desaturated. But if we do that in that order, we're going to desaturate the greens as well. So we need to reverse the order of those operations. So the first thing I did, I desaturated my image to 27.2, from 50 to 27.2. And only then I started pushing some green into my image, thus making this green quite saturated, but the rest of the colors, they are going to be quite desaturated. And when I pushed this green, I didn't use color wheels, I used color bars. They're doing the same thing, they're completely intertwined. If you go from color bars to color wheels, you can see that the settings, they are connected, but it is quite much easier to do that using color bars. Well, all I did, I would navigate here and I would open my reference frame, and I can see that in highlights, for example, my blue is much lower than green and red, they are aligned. So what I did, I removed the blue color from the gain. I also removed it a little bit from gamma, but it reduced my image. And there is a thing in DaVinci Resolve, if you try to remove or push something, DaVinci is trying to remain at the same brightness level as before. And I do not want that, because all of these graphs, all of red, green, and blue, they start to dance around each other, and it's kind of difficult to fine-tune that dance. So to avoid that, before you're gonna do any of these corrections that I'm talking about, to reduce the blue here, reduce blue here, and add a little bit in the shadows, you need to drop this parameter to 0, because initially it was at 100. And if you start playing with that, DaVinci is going to readjust the rest of the colors to meet the same brightness level. I do not want that. I would want to take care of the brightness myself right at the end of this pipeline. So I reduced this Luma mix to 0. Now, I removed some of the blue from gain, I removed some of the blue from gamma, and I introduced a little bit of blue to the shadows, because we can see in our reference frame that all of these are aligned in the shadows. Maybe a little bit of green, a little bit more of green in the shadows, but they are practically at the same level. So here is what I did in this node. Now, I also neutralized my shadows, because we do not really want to have colorized shadows. So as usual, I would go to log wheels. I would push the opposite color, that is like not greenish, yellowish, but the opposite, like bluish, pinkish color, into the shadows, and control it with a range slider to neutralize the shadows, because the deepest shadows in the reference frame, and as always, they are neutral. Now, our next node is created for the highlights. I try to neutralize the highlights the way I neutralized the shadows before. And for that, I created a separate node. So I would push the opposite color in the highlights, and I would control it with the range slider to make our sky not that blue. The rest is not that green, sorry. The rest is supposed to stay like this greenish color, but the sky is going to be a little bit controlled, a little bit less green than the rest of the image. And now the next node, which is quite important, is to reduce the overall exposure, because as we can see, our reference frame is not that bright and our frame was quite bright. So I reduced that brightness using custom curves. To do that, I unlinked my curves and reduced only the Y, which is the luminance slider, not slider, but curve. I reduced the highlights in order to meet the same brightness level as our reference frame. If we have a look at our vector scope, we can see that we are quite close to the reference frame. Not like perfect copy, but it is a totally different frame, totally different environment and time of day maybe, or something like that. So this is as close as I could get to the reference frame, and there are a lot of things that I learned during the way. For example, this desaturation trick and this correction, how to reduce the brightness without affecting anything else, is by using curves. It's really, really useful case. So thank you everybody so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.